to today's Scrappy Live Audio Workshop. Today I'm going to be starting from ground zero for the absolute beginner if you're hoping to jump into live sound. And one of the key foundational things you need to be able to know is how to operate this thing, a mixing console, a desk. There's lots of names for it, but this is an analog desk, meaning it's not attached to a computer or any sort of digital equipment. This has electronic circuits within it that when we twist a knob, it actually changes something about the sound or routes it or moves the sound differently through the desk. So if you can understand the core concepts that are attached to an audio console, they transfer to a lot of other places. Because in addition to be able to operate and know what to do with this, we need to be able to how to set up a clean stage, how to place microphones to get the best sound, how to make sure that our sound system or our speakers are set up in the right spot. But I think it all starts here, and so many of the key foundational concepts can be explained from this. So if you want to follow along with your own analog desk that you have, or maybe get a hold of one, they even make the EPM4, which is even smaller and more affordable, and you can do that. But I want to use a real-world scenario, and we're actually going to be listening to audio pipe through the console and simulate what would happen. I don't have a band with me today. I want to keep things simple, but I'm going to be playing audio out of my computer into the console, and you're going to hear what's happening as I manipulate what's going on. Okay, so let's start from square zero. This is an audio console, right? Has lots of knobs. They all do different things. But it looks intimidating to see all of these, but you could think of this basically first 2/3 of just 8 copies of the same thing. So here at the top, it says channel 1, or this is 1, but that's what this called is a channel, this vertical strip. So if you just zoom in right here, audio flows into an input. It's also called an audio source. So we are sourcing something, an instrument, a vocal, an iPod, whatever it is. I don't know who has iPods anymore, but this is responsible for capturing the sound. So this is usually on our stage. It could be a laptop right next to us, but that's the first thing an audio console is responsible for, is capturing sound from a number of sources. These flow down. Don't worry about any of these knobs here right in the middle, but it flows down to something at the bottom called a fader. And this is what you're going to be operating the most during the show. And this is what balances any particular source from another one. So right here, I've labeled drums, bass, E1, E2. So that's electric 1, electric 2. And that's going to be our scenario today, is a 4-piece band. And by 4-piece, that means 4 members. So a drummer, a bassist, and electric guitarist 1, electric guitarist 2. All right, so each of these inputs or sources flow through the desk, and then we are able to mix or blend them together from 5 inputs down to just 2 outputs. And this is called a stereo output, and it's stereo versus mono. So mono, something's monochromatic. It's all the same color. So mono being 1, and then stereo is if you're listening on a pair of speakers in front of you, you can actually listen to things that are coming on the left versus the right, or right in the center. So that is our stereo bus, our 2 mix, it's also called, or our mix left-right. And that's what the L and the R means. So to recap, we have sources or signals that come into our desk, and right now they're coming in via these cables. They are electrical signals that can be expressed in something called voltage. It's really similar and analogous to water pressure. So it moves down through this channel from top to bottom and comes to our fader, and that is where we mix the relative balances. So if I want a lot more drums, a lot less bass, and a little bit of electrics, that's how we do it. Let's turn down the drums, because we always need to turn on the drums because they play too loud. And then bass here at the middle, and then electric 1, electric 2. That's how we would mix. The actual active part during the show is what you're doing. The mixer mixes them all together, just like you're making a cake. We're combining all the ingredients into one, and it brings it to these 2 master faders, or the mix left, right, or the 2 bus. I'm sorry, there's so many duplicate names for stuff in live audio, but I'm actually sending this out of what's called the monitor output. And I'm doing this instead of the normal outputs because we're going to cover something later called the PFL bus. So I want to be able to turn this down easily. Anyway, so that's what would normally happen, is the band gives you a bunch of sources. You control their levels and usually change the way they sound to make them sound better. It all then gets mixed together into a stereo output called the mix left, right, your 2 bus. It comes out of again, onto two cables. In this instance, it's the monitor output, and we're able to send that to usually a pair of speakers, and that makes it louder for everyone else to hear. Again, we are in the sound support business, or also called the waveform delivery service. Is something I learned from a guy named Merlin Van Veen. We are delivering audio to a wider audience. We got to capture it, manipulate it, send it to the right place, and make sure it's amplified or shared via the airwaves to our audience. That is our craft in a nutshell. But this is the nexus or middle point where we can do that is here at the audio console. Great. Okay. So moving on here, I actually want to start with the bass channel and start to get into what some of these knobs do. So we have a bass guitar, and this is a rock band, so it's going to be a rock setup here. I'm going to start playing this track here, and I'm just going to turn the fader up. We just barely hear it. I'll stop and think, okay, what's one of the first things we got to do? So we hear the bass guitar, we have captured it, and it's coming into our console. And we'll worry about different ways to capture it. We could put a microphone in front of an amp. We could use something called a DI box where they could just plug directly into it. There's lots of ways to do that, but we're just concerned about mixing and routing today. So what we've come to now is something called gain structure. So get gains in the gym, or not the type of detergent. But gaining is we are managing something called a signal level. And oftentimes, the signal is weak. We need to make it stronger. So what we have right here is called the gain knob. You see here on the left-hand side, it has 5 dB, and then we can go up to 60 decibels. If we translate that to linear terms, or something we're used to thinking about, we can actually increase the level to be over 550 times louder than it was. That's crazy with a single knob. But that's why we have the decibel scale. It helps us make a relationship between really small values and really big values without having to use really small and really big numbers. We'll talk about how it works in a later video, or you can just Google the decibel scale. But I just want you to be concerned of we're not adding much level or increasing it, and then now we can add level here. You now be thinking okay, great, that's all well and good, Michael, but what are we shooting for? If it's coming in low, where do we need to get it? So if we're talking about gain structure here, another concept is using something on the console called the PFL. This is also called the solo bus, but PFL is kind of like an old school analog term, and that is pre-fader listen. So before the fader, we can listen to what's going on. And oftentimes we have headphones hooked up right here, and that means, if I'm having a hard time figuring out what's happening on stage, or trying to listen for a buzz or hum that's sounding somewhere, or I just want to hear what the lead vocalist is doing, I could plug in headphones. I hit this PFL button and actually get this red light that tells me the PFL is active. And it sends down the headphone output the signal so I can hear it. And I would be able to control that right here with this headphone knob. But what I'm doing is, since I'm using the monitor bus to see what you and I are both hearing right now, is that the PFL means I can just solo that and hear the bass, but it also turns this meter right here into something that's only showing me the incoming level for this channel. So a meter gives us a visual representation of the level. So I've hit PFL, and we can hear the bass, and now I'm going to use the gain knob to turn it up. And that is where we want to hit that Goldilocks zone of that yellow light. I'm now going to turn down what we're hearing, but we're going to be able to see it still. So great. So that is coming in at a perfect level. If I had the gain knob all the way down, it's just barely tickling these lights. It is too low. And what if I cranked it all the way up? So two places are screaming at us. This is all the way up, which isn't good. And then we have this peak light lighting up, which isn't very happy with us as well. So it doesn't sound bad if the signal is too low. We're just going to run into a couple problems. We're going to have to push this fader way up and still not to be able to hear it very well. It's increasing the level. And we can run into some noise floor issues, and that's something we can cover later on. But if it's blowing out the input, basically the console can't handle or represent that amount of level. This is what it sounds like. I'm going to go here and be careful. It actually sounds kind of cool for a bass in a rock song, but may not be what you're going for it to sound that distorted. So it's actually changing the way it sounds because it's hitting it that hard, or the signal's coming in and the console can't handle it. Okay, so let's bring it back. And now let's get back to our Goldilocks zone here. Great. And so I added, let's see, that looks to be about 25 decibels of gain. And that's a little over a 20x increase in the level. Is neither good or bad that I, had the knob sitting right here in the middle. Some sources or inputs need more help. So a vocalist who's singing softly on a microphone that doesn't output a lot of level may need more gain, and that's okay. But if every input is gassed all the way up, we can get something like this. You hear this noise, so that is a shh. So that's what happens if we bring up what's called the noise floor, as we get this kind of white noise sound that is coming in, and we don't want that. We want this noise to be low versus the signal. So if we are running into maybe an electronic keyboard or a drum machine that's really old, sometimes their outputs or the level they're giving us isn't very strong, so they need a lot of help. But if we're having to do that a lot, we get noise. Okay, so we have covered so far. A signal comes in via a cable. It is electronic or electrical signal at this point. It flows in. And one thing I didn't talk about earlier is that we are running right here into the line inputs. This is a microphone cable, and this is a male XLR cable. And this is more typical when getting something, a source, and it's going to be running into an input like that. We will plug it in. But since I'm using my computer in an audio interface to get signals in and out, it just ended up being better and easier to do it this way. So the preamp, at least on this desk, responds the same either way. And that is the official name of the electronic device that is actually increasing the level. It's called a preamp. So pre meaning before, and amp short for amplifier. So before the amplification, we are getting things on the same playing field. Again, that's why it's important to do this first, because gain is king. If all our inputs, we don't setting that right, we're going to have to fight with ourselves a lot with the faders if things aren't coming in well. So we want to use this gain knob to level the playing field for all of our sources. So let's go ahead and do that. So we've got our bass guitar. Great. And now let's do the same with our drums. And they may or may not be coming in at a similar level. We may not end up with the gain knob coming here. And as a reminder, for this gig, it is an electronic drum kit with just a stereo or left and right output. Similar to we have these left and right outputs here from our console. We can actually go ahead and now, since we know it's going to be left and right, use our pan knobs to move it to the left and right channels, which is really cool. And you think, okay, so pan as in panorama, or pan meaning around. So we can take that and actually can move it to the left or right. Let me show you what that sounds like with the bass guitar first, and then we'll do drums. The left ear, the right ear, moving it around. Pretty cool, huh? And so I'm now able to move things around the stereo field. You can even see that in the metering. So if someone's standing in the middle of your audience, they could hear that movement, which is pretty cool. But at the end of the day, it's not the most important thing to get right. If like, oh, my panning was correct, because we have a lot of audience members standing in different spots in your audience. But if we have a source that is stereo, we want to capture it in stereo because we may be sending this other places like a stream or broadcast feed, somebody's monitor mix. And we'll cover all of that in later videos, but it's a good idea to capture everything that you can. Okay, so let's check out our drums here. So again, good practice is we want to verify we have the incoming signal, and then we can PFL it. And I'm going to go ahead and PFL both. So pretty cool drum track. I'm going to turn up the gain now and get it to our Goldilocks zone. Okay, cool. So those actually ended up with a little bit more gain here for the drums. And now I'm going to bring those up to unity. Great. So I snuck in another audio term on you right there. And it's called unity. That's the same thing as 0 right here on the faders. So when someone says, hey, put the faders at 0 or put them at unity, what they're saying is put them here because that means it's similar to our decibel scale here again. As 0 means we're neither increasing or decreasing the level. So it's flowing in through our preamp. It's actually getting affected by this thing called an EQ, which we'll come to. It goes to right here into the channel. And now I can increase or decrease the level, but if I park it right here at 0, it means I'm doing neither. So at unity here with, again, looks like here we ended up with the same thing on our drums here, about 25-ish dB of gain or decibels of gain. We've increased it to get it to our Goldilocks zone. So now let's put the drums and the bass together. So that's pretty cool. We can now hear the drummer and the bass player playing together. And one thing we haven't done yet is panned out our drums. So if someone says, hey, pan those out, that means they're like, hey, it's a stereo source. Let's push them left and right. So I'm going to do that. So I'm taking the left channel of the drums and the right channel of the drums. If I was really pro, I would have labeled this already. Drums left, drums right. Again, very common, a keyboard, like a electronic keyboard, is very common to have two outputs. It'd be like out left, out right. We do that and we would pan them. So we're using this yellow knob to do that, sending this left channel to right here, right channel right here. Again, if you're listening on headphones, this would just be in your left ear. And this just in your right ear. And then the bass guitar is right in the middle. And you may be thinking, wait a minute, I have headphone on the left and right, or even speakers on the left and right. How is it sounding like it's coming from the middle? That's called the phantom center. There's not actually a speaker right here in front of us. It's left and right. But if something is coming, the same signal from left and right at the same time, at the same level, it sounds like it's coming from the middle. That's what your brain does with it. It's what you've been hearing with my voice the whole time. It is panned up the middle in the center. It's just coming out equally on the left and right. So our brain imagines it in the center, which is pretty cool. What you also saw me do a little bit earlier to show you those channels, I was hitting these red mute buttons. So that does exactly what you think it does. It mutes them. So if I unmute something, you got to be careful because some consoles, Yamaha, their channels, they actually have an on button instead of a mute button. So if you press it and it's orange, it means it's on, not muted. So just know that depending on the console that you are working on. So I'm going to unmute these. So I turned down the bass a little bit to kind of fit it in the mix. Not a whole lot, just making a little bit less than the drums. And now let's keep moving on through our sound check. So the point of a sound check is to make sure we're getting all the right signals and getting them at the right levels and sounding decent within our sound system. Okay, so let's now PFL electric. Again, that's getting in a rhythm here. That's what we would do is PFL something. The fader is down, so it's not going through the PA, but you are going to hear it here in this video. And we want to increase the gain knob to get it to our Goldilocks zone. Okay. Pretty similar gain amount. I guess I could have varied these a little bit more, but that's what's happening here on Electric 1. So I've got that turned up now, and let's see what it sounds like in our mix. So I actually reduced it about 5 decibels to get it to sit, at least in my ears, where I thought it was well. And now let's do the same thing with Electric 2. I'm going to PFL it, just sending it to my headphones. The fader is down, so I'm not hearing it in the house. And let's set the incoming level. So this one needed a bit more help to get to our Goldilocks zone. So that looks like about 35 dB a gain, so about 10 dB more. Again, not a good thing or a bad thing, but we want to be able to manage these incoming levels well, and that's the point of the gain knob. It is king. We want to get this right from the get-go. We use PFL to see it here on our meters. We don't want to clip or be too hot is another way to say it, to go beyond what the console can handle, or if we're too low, we can't get signals loud enough to push the PA, and we run into noise floor issues. Okay, so now let me fold this back into this mix. So I'm actually building the mix as we go along. So I've added flour, eggs, milk, and now this is butter, putting that into our proverbial audio cake. So I have them all together now. Stereo drums, bass, electric 1, and electric 2. So in a live setting, I probably would not pan these out because if I have audience members standing on the left side versus audience members standing on the right side, I don't want them to get two different shows or not to be able to hear what's going on. But if this were a broadcast situation or a studio situation, it probably would. That helps us get separation. So now I'm going to actively do that, is have them about the same level in the middle, then move them outward and see how you're going to be able to more easily hear what's going on. So it's cool to have this panoramic image of seeing the drums that are spacious, the bass down the middle, and the electric guitars out wide. And this leaves a lot of room if I had a vocalist here that could live right in the center. So as a classic rock music mixing is to do that. Have stereo drums, mono bass down the middle, pan out the guitars and any other effects, and then have the vocals right there in the middle. I'm going to now solo each of these elements in context for you to get a feel for like, okay, here's what they sound like on their own, and then bring them back in. And then we'll move on to one of our really cool tools, and that's called an equalizer or an EQ. So here's just the drums, and how I'm going to do that is just mute the other inputs, those three. And now I'm going to move through bass and the electrics. Pretty cool, huh? So we saw how the mix in context, and I kind of soloed each part and adjusted and fine-tuned levels. A spoiler alert, I actually made this track. I had my brother-in-law play the drums, but and record them at his place, send them over. I played the bass and the electric guitars. So I played this with arrangement in mind. You can hear that this electric is down low, this one's up high. And you can see that here. So I did that to create space in the mix, because if everything's playing in the same range or similar parts, it gets cluttered and dense. And that's something we don't have control of most of the time as an audio engineer, is we just get to mix what's given to us. We have these inputs and we need to do the best we can. Our first line of defense, other than executing on the fundamentals and getting gain structure right, is being able to balance things to the right level. We are deciding what the audience is hearing. And so if you're a control freak and a musician, I would think like, well, why not play all the instruments and get in front of a console? So that's what we're doing here. We are balancing how the whole mix or the song should be received. Now I've done that here. Again, not crazy movements. This isn't way up here. The bass isn't way down here. But I've done that with the electrics. But it might be like, okay, the electric one takes a solo. I might push them up, they're done, and I tuck them back in so I can hear a little bit more of the mix. So we are guiding our listener through the song and through the arrangement. So if the band has done us a favor and given us a good arrangement with good sounds, we're not going to have to work super hard to make things sound good. We just need to pay attention to what's happening with the song, manage the levels well, make sure it's appropriate volume for the room, and away we go. So let's say we are getting something and tonally, or just it's sounding a bit bright or harsh or thin to us. We can actually alter the tonal character of the source with something called an equalizer. So where this fader turn things up and down globally, I mean like the entire electric guitar gets moved up and down. So our fader is responsible for turning the level up globally on a specific source. So I've muted our drums, bass, and electric 2. So you get it. We're hearing it turn up and down, right? But if I just wanted to alter a specific portion of the sound, I could do that as well. So I'm going to put the electric 1 here right back in the middle, and I've got these knobs up here. So starting from top to bottom, I have HF, MF, LF. So that's high frequency, mid frequency, low frequency. So what does that mean? So a frequency, what we think about what does that word mean in other contexts? So how frequent do you order something from Amazon.com? Some of you are saying every hour. How frequently do I drink coffee? Every single morning. So frequency is actually referring to the audio wave and how many times it completes a cycle every second. So audio in its rhythms is actually cyclical. And so that means different things, whether it's in an analog, digital, or electronic form. So that is actually airwaves moving in a pattern. And we actually can control how much is represented. So the human ear can hear from 20 hertz. So hertz is another way to measure the number of times something is rotating through its cycle per second. So 20 hertz is way down in the basement. And then we can go all the way up to 20,000 hertz, which is way, way, way up high. I can't even hear that high anymore. As you get older, you lose hearing, or your high frequency range. But we have a way to manipulate the tonality of something. So what's happening here on this knob, the LF knob, it's actually a low shelf. That means at a certain frequency range and below, it's going to increase or decrease that. So why don't we just hear it? So let's check out this electric. There it is for reference. And then now I'm going to have it till we are able to decrease the lows. You hear it thinned out, or it got kind of empty and hollow sounding because I took out a bunch of the lows. And now let me increase it. Cool. Now what does this sound like on the drums? So yeah, I took out a bunch of low end, then I added it and actually increased it so much that I had too hot of a signal going into my recorder here. But all that being said, that LF knob controls the amount of low end, is another word to think to people call it, like, hey, give me more low end, give me more bottom, if you will. That knob can do it. So it's a single place where, like, hey, I'm not going to change the entire level of the signal, but if we have it from left to right here, I'm just bumping up the bottom end right here. And now let's go to the top end. So we can do the same thing here in this knob at the top called HF, and this is another high shelf. So everything from the high frequencies and up, and on this one, I think it's about 12K or 12,000 hertz. This guy, I think, is 160 hertz and below. I think you can divide up the frequency ranges into 3 buckets as you're starting to learn it. And that is from 20 to 200. So all you got to remember is the numbers 2 and 0. So 20 hertz to 200 hertz, and then 200 hertz to 2000 hertz, and then 2000 hertz all the way up to 20,000 hertz. So those 3 buckets are kind of lows, mids, and highs in my brain. So this one's in general altering that low bucket. And now let's move up to our high bucket. So let's hear what that sounds like on the electric guitar again. So you heard it got kind of bright and in your face is another word to say it. And then I turned it, counterclockwise, and it got dark and kind of pushed back is another way. As you move along in your audio journey, you're going to start to reach for certain adjectives or way of describing sound that makes sense to you, because we were not born understanding, hey, that sounds like 20,000 hertz. So there is too much 2,000 or 2 kilohertz in that signal. We use adjectives to describe it. We actually use very visual adjectives. We use sight, so something is dark or bright. Something is even more embodied adjectives like warm. Something feels warm. That usually means it has a lot of low end. It's very relaxed feeling. So you're going to get better and better as you get more comfortable with these tools to translate what you're feeling or hearing in those adjectives into actionable moves. So it's basically shortening the path from your brain or your ear to your hands to make changes. And being able to manipulate levels, and then EQ is one of the core things you're going to get best at first as you move along in your journey. So let's see what that feels like on the bass guitar. We usually think of bass not having a lot of high end, but this one does. We're actually using a pick, which has a more plucky attack on it. And here, again, I'm having to do it on both channels since I have a left and right for the drums. Now that we have covered the high and low shells, let's move here to the middle. You see how this one's white instead of the black knob? This is what's called a sweepable or movable mid-range band. So in the mid-range, in addition to seeing like what's the actual level we can change. See how this is the same color. This is controlling the gain or level of that band. And the inverse of gain is attenuation, to turn something down. So we can actually choose the frequency range. So these are preset for us, these high and low shells at a specific range. I mentioned earlier, I think it's 160 and 12K. And they actually reach much farther below and higher than that. But here I get to be more specific and like, hey, I just want more of, all the way at the bottom here, 150 hertz, and then all the way at the top, 3.5K. That's a big range. So let me show you what that sounds like on the electric again. So first I was boosting at the very bottom of the range and then moved it up, and you got to see that. And actually I had to turn down the output a little bit since it was coming in hot. And then I decreased the level, and our range here is 15 decibels, and then move that through and we can cut. So we have two decisions here. Something is feeling a little bit dark or distant to us, and we need to brighten it up. We can either do that by adding some high frequencies, or we can go to where we feel like it's too muddy or unclear or too much lows and cut them or decrease it. So I usually end up working in a cut fashion where I'm usually I work like an ice sculpture person where I'm chipping away what I don't need. But some people think additively, and that's totally okay. Either way works. So what we've been hearing, the drums, bass, and electrics is coming after I've mixed it. So they are coming in pretty good shape, but we still could use EQ to alter the sound further. So I am going to see if I can just make a little bit more drastic and exaggerated change to everything just to see how we might do this in context. So I'll talk through it here. Let's start with just drums. And let me add some top end. Bass. Let's say the pick attack I thought was really annoying and we want to get rid of that. That would probably be right about 3.5K. And again, you will develop your intuition for knowing what that's going to be, but I'll demonstrate it. You see how it got kind of nasally and aggressive and pointy at that range? So let me get rid of that. And right now I've been soloing a lot of things, but we always want to make sure our mix decisions translate in context. So let me unmute here and see how it sounds like with the drums. You see how when I decreased a lot of that 3.5K energy, it took the point and the attack of the bass guitar away, so it wasn't as attention grabbing, which is okay in some contexts. Sometimes you want a really smooth, warm, buttery sound. Sometimes you want an aggressive, in-your-face, pointed sound, something that can cut through in a dense mix. Again, this is just a lot of audio lingo I'm throwing at you. What's common terms to describe sound. You will develop your own vocabulary that makes sense to you, but need to be comfortable with the other words that's commonly used by the industry. So let's look at the electrics here. I'm going to mute everything except electric 1. Let's say right in the middle of the mid-range, it sounds kind of boxy or honky to me. That might be at 500 hertz, so I'm going to try that out here. Yeah, I kind of find that range, and I can boost to expose it and then cut it after I know I don't need it. So that's too much. I also boosted a little bit of low end to give me some girth down low, which is fun. So now let me look at the lead electric. It's actually 2 guitars, I'm cheating. But let's see what we want to do. Maybe we want the top end to stick out a little bit more, pay attention more to the lead. So I'm going to do the same thing, but I want to use a high shelf. Cool. So I kind of put the whole mix back together. I panned out the guitars again. Again, in a live context, I probably wouldn't do this, but since we are listening in more of a headphone or studio format, just showing you what is possible. But again, all these are moving down here to the channels, summing to my mix left, right, and going into my recorder right here. Okay, so let's do one more thing, and that is moving on to what in the world do these green and blue knobs do? And these are aux sends. We will cover this more in depth in a later video, but at least wanted to show you like, hey, what in the world do all these knobs do? And we've covered almost all of them here. This aux, think of it auxiliary, and that word usually means, hey, it was an additional feature. So we can now send this individual source, so let's call it the bass guitar channel 3 right here, and we can say, I want to send that to aux 1. That is another destination, or output is another name for it, and we have that right here, aux out 1. So if I took this cable, and I was like, hey, I actually want to send this to somewhere else, I could get, cool, great, and I plug that cable. Maybe it goes all the way back to the stage into a monitor mix, and that is a speaker that's actually sitting on the stage pointed back at the performer so they can hear themselves. So that is the most common use of an aux. This is also called a bus or a mix in other console or manufacturer platforms. But that's how I would do it, is the signal comes in, and I say, hey, this fader is controlling the master mix or the main mix right here, but I want to also send it other places, and that's how I would do it. So sending it to an aux. So if I only had 2 monitor mixes for the whole band, let's say I give one to the drummer and the rest of the band shares, the drummer may want a good bit of themselves, especially because they have an electric drum kit in this sense. They want some bass. They don't like electric one, so not a lot of him, and they want a lot of electric too. That's how we would change that. And this cable's running to that speaker, and that's how they would hear. Then aux 2 is just a duplicate. It's the same thing, so this separate output, and we can run that. We'll see our last concept here at the end is our aux masters. So we have something called pre or post fader. This is a little bit difficult for a lot of new engineers to grasp, but I'll do my best to explain it here, and then we will wrap up. So aux 1 pre, that means the button is up, so I can press it in or out. So if it's up, that means whatever I do with this knob, so the bass coming in here to the aux, if I choose to set it at this level, and right here at 3 o'clock is unity, at least in the manual, that's what I found. That means it doesn't care what's happening here on my main mix. That means no matter what happens, unless I mute it, it's going to pass out at that level. If I make it post fader, if I push that in, it's going to come in, be sent at this level, that also be governed by this. So if I have my fader here at unity, that means it's just going to be the same as that. But if I turn this down, even if this is sitting at that level, it's going to take both into account. It's basically adding both of these values together. And, if we add a negative value, it subtracts. So if I have plus 10 and this at plus 10, that's going to be a really, really hot signal, right? So if I keep this at unity and move it down while it's post fader, it's going to affect it. So why would I want something pre versus post fader? So here's 2 different scenarios. Let's say aux 1 is a monitor mix for the whole band. So that's not a great setup to be in, but maybe that's all that came. I would usually set that pre fader. And so that means I'm going to be able to dial in the mix for the band where they're happy. And then whatever I'm doing for the house, it's another name for the main mix that's passing out to the audience, they're not hearing those changes because, again, it is pre what's happening on these faders. Versus they're like, hey, the band wants a recording of the show from our console. That's not at all uncommon to ask for. They have a little handheld recorder that just has one little input, and we need to make sure the mix goes out to it. Well, they want to have it sound different than the mix that's coming out of to the main speakers. They want to be able to control that a little bit. So I could actually take it and let's say this same cable, and now I'm putting on aux 2 around the other side of it into the recorder. And now I could have this send like, hey, we do want the drums at unity, but since we have guitar amps on stage and those contribute, usually the faders end up way down here, but we want to make sure it gets to the recorder. So we are going to send a good bit of guitars, but have them post fader. So I hit that, the post, it's still going to follow your main mix. So they're getting your decisions, but we can maybe send the levels a little bit differently to make sure that destination works out. If that's still a little bit fuzzy to you, that's okay. I'm most concerned today with you understanding a source coming into an input, being governed by the gain knob to get to our Goldilocks level. We can alter the tonality if we need to with EQ. We could send it multiple places, either an aux or our main bus. We're usually thinking about our main bus. We can have a gain knob to pan it left or right or down the middle or anywhere in between. Our fader determines the relative mix balance of all the elements as it moves to our mix left-right. That passes back out of our console, going to a pair of speakers, and we can have a great sounding show. All right, covered a lot here. There was a lot of fun. I hope this provided some more fundamentals and a foundation for you as an audio engineer, starting to wade into things. I'm excited to keep running with this Back to Basics series. My name is Michael Curtis. I'll catch you next time.